So the world has lost another music legend, country folk singer and songwriter John Prine. Prine's family says he died from coronavirus complications yesterday in Nashville. He was 73 years old. Known for his unmistakable raspy voice, Prine spent nearly 5 decades perfecting plain-spoken country folk songs that chronicled the struggles and stories of everyday working people. The two-time Grammy Award winner's hits such as Hello in There, Sam Stone, helped to change the face of modern American roots music and inspired other chart-topping greats, including Bob Dylan.
John Heilemann, Kris Kristofferson went to hear John play in 1969 and was absolutely blown away. And he wasn't the only one over the course of his career. As Mika just said, greats like Bob Dylan considered him one of the best in music.
Yeah, you know, that story with the Kris Kristofferson story, Joe, was a similar thing that happened with Roger Ebert in Chicago. People would wander into these bars in Chicago around that time and stumble on this guy who was playing music and writing lyrics in particular, unlike anything they'd heard this side of Bob Dylan. You know, Prine got compared to Dylan a lot when people were looking for the new Dylan. He was, Dylan said he was pure existential, Proustian existentialism on the page. And I think if you think about people purely as songwriters in the second half of the 20th century, you'd have to put him on the short list of 3 or 4 who were the best writers out there. And he had a career that, you know, went on for many decades. He won Grammys, Lifetime Achievement Awards. He was in the folk category. He was in the country category. He wrote ballads that were covered by people like Bonnie Raitt and other famous singers who did them, who paid tribute to his writing. He survived 2 bouts with cancer, which is why this is such a gut punch for a lot of people. Having had a lung cancer and a throat cancer, that he got through and was still making some of his best music into his 70s. So to lose him now is a particularly acute punch in the solar plexus for people who care about music and songwriting. The thing I loved about one of the things I loved about Prine most was, you know, he said once that writing was staring at a blank piece of paper, and deciding among all the things in the world what not to put on the page, which told you something about his theory about how everything in life was material for Prine. And I think one of the things that was so kind of powerful for a lot of people was that not only was he so poetic, but he also had an incredibly dark and hilarious sense of humor about the human condition. That was the thing that Dylan and Kristofferson and others found so compelling about him. Last thing I'll say for anybody who doesn't know the song In Spite of Ourselves, a late career duet that he did with Iris DeMent. It's a song that my wife Diana and I played at our wedding. I strongly commend it to anybody who wants to hear a song that is a joyous celebration of love, but with a great sense of humor and a wry kind of understanding of what couples have to do and appreciate themselves to make it last for a long time.
All right, John Heilemann, thank you so much. That was beautiful. We really appreciate it. And thanks for being on this morning. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube. And make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.